what happened was I was sitting here because of this COVID thing. I'm literally in my bedroom and I'm seeing clients. And when I finished seeing probably about 4 or 5 clients, I started to pack up. But as I started to pack up, I have windows. So I'm looking to the left and I started to see that it just looked abnormal. Like it looked as if that there was a car that was stalled and then the cars behind the car were stopped and they were going up a bridge. I just started to see out my peripheral, and then all of a sudden I started to see police cars and fire engines, because at first I thought it was an accident, right? That would be the first thought. But then there was something that came up in my spirit that just reminded me of when I used to work with police and I was a part of the hostage negotiation team up in Arlington. I said, nope, something else is going on. I said, they are trying to get to somebody. And all of a sudden, as I get to the top, I saw someone up on the top of the bridge and they were twirling around, and then there was a dog. So there were like 3 professional men, right, like officers. As the dog is up at the top, the person is at the top, and then the 3 officers were like some distance away. They started to exit people off of the, like back in the other cars that was stalled, that was stopped off the bridge. So I stopped everything and I just watched. It appeared to be a man, but it could have been a woman. I don't know the gender. And it looked as if they were trying to talk to this person. So now I'm realizing this is really going on. It's a negotiation and they're trying to get this person to live, to want to live, to come down off the bridge. All of a sudden, jumps up on the top and out of nowhere falls over the side of the bridge. Like it wasn't, as you could imagine, a jump. It was a like, I'm just giving in, I'm done, and I'm just letting go. And yeah, I watched that whole thing, which was traumatizing, and I had to process that, right? I needed to take some time to process that for myself so that I could go on and continue to do the work that I'm doing. But it just makes me so sad that whomever that person was just decided life was over for them.
What to do when your life is interrupted? That's the question that COVID-19 is causing us all to ask and to address.
Anxiety and depression are 2 of the most common mental health disorders. According to the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, approximately 40 million American adults have at least one type of anxiety disorder, and the impact of the coronavirus is causing an increase in both areas. Welcome to the Superpower Podcast. I'm your host, Dia Direct, and today's episode is a candid girlfriend's conversation exploring how to cope with anxiety and depression in general, and specifically when your life has been interrupted as a result of COVID-19.
Today, we'll be joined by author and therapist Andrea Wise Brown. She's a psychotherapist. She is the author of 6 Pillars to Power Up Your Mind. Mental Health is a Lifestyle. And we'll be also joined by psychotherapist Tori Dixon, who is also a grief specialist. And together we'll be talking about how we are coping with COVID-19 and how our lives have changed, but also giving you tools, real tools that you can use to help you deal with grief, the loss of job or a loved one, or just your lifestyle. When it comes to trauma and the things that you're having to deal with internally, where your life is, where it once was, how you feel about it, but also how some old trauma may be manifesting as a result of having to get quiet, right? How it may be manifesting in your physical body and helping you to also identify some of those physical issues that you may be having. They may be a result of trauma. It's really interesting when you find out what the connection is between the mind and the body and how it shows up in times like these. And we'll also be dealing with issues like how to deal with anxiety and depression, how to deal with your loved ones when you're having to cope with them at home in a new and different way. And most importantly, how to cope with yourself in the midst of COVID-19. But the good news is, as much as there's been challenges and hopelessness, there's also hope. And so we'll be providing solutions, real solutions that you can apply to your life, because we are about the business of helping you to take your life to the next level. That's the whole point of this podcast. This is going to be some life-changing information. I promise you, I got my own therapy session in the middle of providing this podcast for you. So listen in. So here we are. The story you just heard,
that you just shared, Andrea,
really paints the picture of what people are going through right now. There's a level of desperation, anxiety, and people feel out of control to the point where some may consider desperate measures, even as suicide. And so on today's show, we want to talk to you about how to cope in the midst of COVID. But really, we're talking about how to deal with life on life's terms as it is right now. I want to thank you, ladies, for joining me. I have so many questions, and I know you have so many answers for many of us who are trying to cope in the middle of all of this. And so, Andrea, explain to me what kinds of emotions usually make a person want to give up to the point of giving up on life or taking their life.
Yes. So the diagnosis would be depression. But people get to a place where they feel helpless, like there is no help any place else for them to make whatever current situation that they're in change. They feel hopeless. They don't see a glimmer of light in their future. They have no belief that this current situation that they are finding themselves in, that is extremely troublesome and traumatic, they don't see it changing, and they don't feel the hope and that it changes. And so that's the space that people get to, hopelessness and helpless.
So what's the difference, Tori, between feeling hopeless and depressed versus anxiety, which we know a lot of people are also experiencing right now in the midst of COVID-19?
Much of what we see when we discuss anxiety and depression, oftentimes the symptoms can appear to be the same. When I look at someone who has hopelessness that's associated with depression, I see it as them looking at a past that they're trying to rectify into the current or the future or the present that they're actually living in. So for me, when I see a client and they're dealing with depression, they're hopeless typically because they feel as though they have created a past that they cannot change. When I see a client who is experiencing hopelessness with anxiety being a part of the symptomatology, then what they're trying to do is they're trying to fix a future that they haven't experienced yet. So for me, a person dealing with depression, they are looking in the past, they're trying to recreate, fix a past that cannot be fixed, cannot be changed. And with anxiety, they are trying to control or create a future that too cannot be changed or fixed because you're not even there yet. So when I look at the hopelessness, the similarity in the two is that there is hopelessness on both sides of the spectrum. It's just one person is trying to deal with the past that cannot be changed. The other is trying to control a future that hasn't appeared yet.
There are so many people right now who are experiencing a host of emotions. How do you know what you're experiencing, and how do you know when it's time to get help? People are feeling out of control. How do you know if that's just what you're feeling and it's normal because we're in normal circumstances versus, you know what, I may really need to get some help? Either one of you can take it.
So let me just I'll go first, Tori, please. I want everyone to understand, in addition to what Tori is saying, is that every single human being has anxiety. So let me just tell you what normal anxiety looks like. Right? So normal anxiety looks like, let's all go back to childhood when we were little kids and we were about to get on stage and we were, had a school play and we needed to be a tree or a lion, right? So the butterflies that are in your stomach that you feel just before you're about to walk out because there's an audience full of people and all of the fears of what may happen, all of the dangers that you could imagine, you get these butterflies. If I'm going to fail, if I'm not going to do right, or be a great tree. And so then you get butterflies, right? So let's say probably about 95% of the children will get butterflies. That's anxiety, right? However, once you get out on stage and you start to be the best tree that you could ever have been, and you start to notice and see the feedback from the audience, and your brain realizes that you're not really in danger, so then the anxiety goes away. So that's a normal response to anxiety. Now, there's a predisposition for some people to have higher levels of anxiety than others. So let's just say the other classmates who may have that predisposition to have more anxiety than others will feel that feeling, those butterflies, that sickness, most of the time, even when there isn't a rational reason to be afraid. There isn't a reason for you to go into sympathetic nervous system, that whole fight or flight. So there isn't a rational reason for you to be afraid, and yet you have a predisposition to have a high anxiety, so you're afraid all the time. But I always like to kind of teach people about anxiety, because so that people can have a language and an understanding, and that it normalizes it, so people can kind of reach out and get help. And you reach out and you get help when you feel as if it is impacting your life. If you can't get out and go to the store like you would like to, if when before COVID-19 we were working in the workplace and you are afraid to socially speak to someone else or to go into a business meeting, that's impeding on your functioning. If you're afraid to get on the elevator with someone, or afraid to have real conversations with other people because of anxiety, right? Another form of social anxiety. Those are reasons that anxiety will impede on your functioning. So you need to reach out to a therapist, right? To someone who can help you, to teach you coping skills so that you can kind of get through that and overcome it. Put anxiety in its place.
So good. In this time that we're in, I feel like there's going to be more anxiety. For instance, I've never been a germaphobe, but just the whole notion of getting myself prepared to leave the house. Okay, like putting on the masks, the gloves, when you come home, where do you put your shoes, cleaning your shoes, Lysoling everything. I feel like I'm going to become a germaphobe, but at the same time, it's overwhelming. I went to the grocery store this morning, I put on a mask, and I walked when I was walking to the grocery store, but at the same time, it's like I can't breathe the same way. I can't breathe air the same way. Mm-hmm. That was giving me a little bit of anxiety. I felt like, okay, already, like I want to be safe, but at the same time, this is uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. So I feel like even as we're coming out of COVID, so to speak, at least the sense of crisis, it's going to be a new normal. Yes. And how do we cope with this new normal and how our lives are changing?
Sometime before COVID, when people would come to us and we would help them through anxiety, we would pretty much teach them the difference between a rational fear and an irrational fear. Well, so dear, what you're experiencing and all of us is something that we would see before as being an irrational fear. But now the fear is really rational, because we do not know how you can catch this disease. However, we know that it is running rampant. You can catch it, and some people are actually dying from it, right? So that is the reality. So you're not a germaphobe. What you're doing is you are making decisions to take care of yourself here and now with the information that we have that has been provided to us. So you're being smart. So what I would say is let go of the fear of judging yourself for doing things differently, because we are in a different time. And then and you accept it. Accept what is for right now. Accept what you know for sure. This is what you do to keep yourself safe. You need gloves. You need to wash your hands. You need to put a mask on and learn how to breathe differently. So accept that. Once you accept it with an understanding of this is what this is without judging yourself, your anxiety will go down. It's real for all of us.
Well, I agree. I think that once we come to that space where we are allowing ourselves to make the conscious decision without judgment of self, that we're going to have to make changes that's going to be necessary for us to feel comfortable in our own living space, in our own living environments, then that's kind of when the anxiety in many ways will subside. Because again, as she mentioned, the changes that we're going to have to make, which we would consider once quote unquote irrational, now they are very real and very necessary in order for us to be able to get through this season of time and of our lives where we are having to go through more measures than we had to before in order to stay healthy. Another part of this is to, again, remind ourselves that this is just a season. Mm-hmm. And just like seasons come, they also go. Mm-hmm. No season stays the same throughout the year. It's winter, spring, summer, fall. Of course, at Texas, it's cool, hot, and very hot. But We know when the seasons for us change. We still know when we go from 70 to 125. We know because it does not stay the same. And in reminding ourselves that our seasons, this is a season of our life. This is a season of the time that we are here. We don't know how long this season is going to last.
Thank you for that. And it brings me to something that you specialize in, Tori, which is grief. And I love the way that you explain grief to normalize that it's okay to grieve things beyond just death. And so I think many of us are grieving the loss of how we used to experience life, right? But in the middle of all this major stuff happening where lives are being lost, sometimes you might judge that you don't have the right to grieve that you've lost because so many other people are experiencing what they may consider more of a deeper loss. So I want to talk about loss because there are so many levels of it that people are experiencing right now. Loss of life as they knew it, loss of having, gainful employment or challenges with their business, loss of so many things. In addition to, people are losing friends, family members. Some people are losing both parents at the same time, and you spread it to other people. You grieve that. There's so many levels to this thing right now. Can you just talk to me about grief and help us to understand what it is and how do we cope? How do we get through it? How do we even define it during these times?
One of the ways that we define, that we know, and that we create a healthy space for grieving is to acknowledge that a loss occurred. We cannot grieve things that we have not yet acknowledged, that this thing is gone and that it has created an impact on my life. Whether it is the untimely death of a loved one due to COVID, the loss of being able to properly memorialize your loved ones because you can't have funeral services for them, because there's only 10 people allowed at the service, including the staff members, because we're now having to Zoom live into memorial services. We don't get the community that's created by these memorial services. And these services are so necessary in putting us on the right road to the grieving process. We have to be able to acknowledge that all of us are grieving. And along with this grief process that we are experiencing, the anxiety and the depression are the emotional components of the grieving process that in many ways keeps us connected to the event. What ends up happening is when we have dissociated or when we have disconnected from the event, we become emotionally numb and anesthetized in many ways. And that delays and complicates the grieving process. So when you talk about grief, there are stages. In those stages, they don't come kind of like a 1, 2, 3. Grief comes in waves. What we need to know about grief is that it is a lifelong process, and that the goal is to create a healthy grieving environment, both externally and internally, that will allow for the intensity of the grief to subside for as long as you live. And if you've lost a loved one, you're always going to grieve the loss of that loved one. The goal in grief counseling and in grief therapy is not to move you so much past the grief, but to put you on a road that will intensify, that will help the intensity of the grief to lessen over time. We are not used to grieving. As a society, we are not used to losing. We are a win society. We want to win at everything. We want to win at what we do. And so when we do experience these losses, we do not know how to categorize them, and we do not know what it looks like to have to experience this loss. And we're doing it on such a great scale. And I think that's probably what's going to be important as we move into these next phases.
Where do we begin?
The first step that I would say is to, one, acknowledge that there has been a loss, right? That all of our normal activities, whether it be baby showers, graduations, weddings, jobs, finances, 401ks, homes, apartments, friendships, relationships, we have to acknowledge that we have experienced the loss. And when we begin the next phases of that grief process, the process starts in this phase that we call the denial phase. And typically when I talk about denial, people often think it's like, am I saying that this never happened? And we're saying no. I say denial is the buffer, if you will, between the actual event happening and your actual emotional state. Andrea spoke about the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. And I believe that that denial is a cushion between what actually happens in those nervous systems so that we don't completely break down emotionally, but it allows us to kind of spoon feed our reality to our emotions so that we can kind of take it one bit at a time. So we have that denial phase. Then you have that anger phase where you're angry at your situation, angry at maybe the way things have been handled, angry at your job, angry at God, angry at self. There is this anger that comes along with this grieving phase. And people are like, well, I don't understand why I'm so angry. And that is that anger that's associated with that grieving because you have lost something and it is going to require you to now change the way or change the course of the way that you're doing life because this thing is gone. And then you have that bargaining stage. You want to bargain. If I would have done this, then maybe this wouldn't have happened. Maybe if I would have called the ambulance when the cough started, then maybe my mom wouldn't be gone. Maybe if I didn't go over there, maybe if I weren't the one who went to the actual funeral and brought that back home, maybe if this or if that. So you start to bargain, trying to find those answers to help you in many ways bridge that emotional self to the reality of the event that happened. And then you have this depression that you go into. And the depression that one experiences during the grieving process, though the symptoms are similar to what happens for someone who's not grieving something, it's not the same. It's chemically not the same. It's psychologically not the same because the grief during the depression experience during the grief process is specifically associated with that particular event. Now, there may be other things that's pervasive around it, but it's a little bit different than a generalized depression. Feel everything of life is in kind of like a black hole or under a black cloud. And then you have that acceptance phase, and not acceptance and saying that you're okay with what's happened, but acceptance. And now I understand that I'm going to have this new normal and I'm going to have to integrate this loss into a new life that I'm going to have to live after having experienced the loss.
Wow. That really leads me to this concept of knowing that it's okay not to be okay, Andrea. And I think a lot of Black women in particular and women of color have bought into this, strong Black woman concept. And for a lot of us, we're not okay with not being okay, right? We haven't been allowed to not be okay because we always have to keep going. And I think it's led us into this space where if things aren't okay, if there is a loss and a perceived loss of control, i.e. you lost your job, i.e. your business is not doing as well, i.e. you're going through a divorce and all these things. And I feel like women like this, boss women, if you will, often not only want a sense of security and control, because I think most people want that, but I think there's shame that often shows up. And you spoke to that. And I want to just, I know you see a lot of women who are considered boss women. Is there shame associated with this loss or these changes that are happening? And if so, why?
Okay, absolutely there is. And I just think that is an amazing question because people always assume that boss women, quotation, right, or strong women don't need help, that they don't break, that they don't crack, that they aren't sad, right, that they are not broken, when a lot of times boss women are broken. They start off broken and that's how they turn out into bosses, which is the reason where the shame actually comes from, because there's a fear that if I don't continue this boss status, then I'm nothing. Then I'm that little girl who doesn't have the same worth that I feel like I have accumulated as I have actually accumulated my net worth. Your net worth and your self-worth is two totally different things. But we get that screwed up in childhood. So usually what happens is, for a lot of boss people who like to have control over things, usually in childhood, there has been trauma. And a lot of people assume, right, that trauma looks like molestation, or that you've been raped, or that maybe you have been, beaten badly, physically abused. But that's not what trauma is. So trauma is anything that actually changes the brain. So it could be lack of many things. It could be lack of finances. It could be lack of support, lack of love. I mean, you could have two parents in a household and still be traumatized because you didn't have the things that you needed, or yet you have been exposed to things that you shouldn't have been exposed to, and it changes your brain. It changes the way that you see the world. And so then all of a sudden you start to feel the need to detach, as Tori was talking about, but detach yourself mentally from the situation and go into a mode where you feel like you have to come out of this by your own works. Your own works is overworking, overachieving, right? You start to imagine what it would look like to keep yourself safe. So you go into working towards becoming this boss person, becoming a person who's always in charge, so that you never see yourself back in that vulnerable space where you were traumatized during childhood in the beginning. And so when we overwork in order to create this space that we imagine is a safe space, a lot of times we box people out. So we box men out of relationships. We box people out of, friendships with us. We even box ourselves away from family because of, maltrust in creating this safe space. So when something else in life occurs, like what we're going through now, and some of those things that you've worked for to get into this supposed safe space is ripped away from you, well, who are you now? And a lot of people don't know. A lot of bosses don't know who they are because they've never worked on who they were from childhood or from the time that they were traumatized. They just have this false sense of self where they've tied their self-worth and their self-esteem to this. So now if I don't have this safe space that I've created that looks like my home, my car, my business, my title, then who am I? And that's where more of the anxiety and the depression comes from.
That's so good. I mean, personally, I can relate to everything that you just said. And the first time I heard you talk about that shame being associated with childhood, it brought me back to being in the back seat of the car with my family members who had negative things to say about my parents and how they were parenting me or how they were acting out in life. And I remember now associating myself with the labels that were put on my parents because I'm a direct reflection of their quote unquote failures, right? And so you don't even realize that you internalize these things. And so suddenly when things aren't going as well, especially like, I'm just going to be like transparent, achieved all these things. And then when all these things shift, then even if you feel like you have a good sense of yourself, you're suddenly forced to deal with who you are without all the accoutrements, without all the coverings, without all the titles. And it brings you to that place of, who am I now? Who am I really? And who do I want to be beyond this? And oftentimes, if you haven't done the work, you feel like you're starting from scratch. And you just got to get naked. You gotta get really naked and real about how you feel about yourself. So I see you chomping at the bit, but I also want to hear from you a response to that. How is that concept manifesting itself now when you see people who may be going through some of those emotions? How are people who now have to be at home alone because they're not so busy, right? And they're not distracted by, a trip every other month, or they can't, even if they can do it financially, you can't do it because you can't travel like that right now. It's not safe to do. Or if you're married, you can't avoid your marital issues because you have to be at home with your partner and you've got to face your stuff.
Yes.
We'll be back with more Superpower Her with your host, Dia Direct.
Have you ever been in a relationship, personally or professionally, that has failed? and it made you feel lost and discouraged? Well, what if I told you that you can literally leverage every single painful situation and make your pain pay you back? After all, it cost you something. Just like with a bank account, you want to get some interest off of everything that you've been through. All the tears, all the time, all the effort. Make it pay you back. Use it. Leverage it. Check out my Amazon #1 bestseller, Failure is Fuel, and experience how my testimony can fuel your life to the next level.
We're back where Superfly Women testify. It's the Super Power Her podcast with your host, Dia Direct.
Yes. And so what I would say is exactly what you just said. This is the time where you have to find yourself because you don't have the distractions. Mm-hmm. And so if you want to heal, what happens is you get on that phone and you call Tori or you call my office or someone else, another therapist, because what you need to do is to go back and get raw. And we'll go back to that little girl who was in the backseat of that car who started to see herself is less than the God that she was. She started to see herself as all of the imperfections that she heard that her parents were. See, right then, she started to see herself as someone who wasn't a winner without having to overachieve and create this other space. She didn't see herself as being raw, just who she was, just as God created to overcome everything. So what Tori and I do is we go back there and then we start to teach you what is real. We start to peel off all of that maladaptive nonsense that you actually learned from the environment, aunt and uncle in this case. So peel those things off and remind you of who you are. And then together we start to do the work. So we rebuild you from right there where someone else derailed you. And and as you become and start to rebuild, you will start to see who you are. You understand what I'm saying? Who you really are, where you can overcome this and everything else. You'll start to understand that your circumstance has nothing to do with you, which means that this current circumstance of COVID has nothing to do with you. Mm-hmm. The circumstance of the bad car that you dropped has nothing to do with you. The circumstance of the title that you had and how much money you have has nothing to do with you. You are much greater than that. So once we go back there to the reality of that and build you up, then you start to understand that none of this really matters and that you have everything that you need to overcome this and everything else that you have to deal with or face in life.
You know, what's really interesting is that before COVID, I'm just having my own little personal therapy session right now. Before COVID, God had already put me in a state of shifting, right? And I recognized it as what spiritually can be seen as the wilderness. And what happens in the wilderness is all the things that on the outside that define you get peeled off, so that you can get back to the core of who you are and really begin to get back in touch with yourself, right? And the things that matter in your core, right? In your spirit, man. And really, so for me in this season of COVID, I feel like I've already gone through a lot of the processes that a lot of people are having to deal with now, but it's painful. It's difficult because you're in your own head. You're judging yourself. You're feeling, whether it's true or not, you're feeling judged by others. You're challenged by the change. You're challenged by who am I? How am I being perceived? How do I perceive myself? How do I move forward? How do I pivot? You know, all the unknowns, right? And dealing with self-worth and self-value, right? And really, who gives that to you? And recognizing, you know, for me in this season, that never really came from the outside anyway. I responded to it, and because it came so often, I became addicted to the praise. I became addicted to how people responded to me in certain places and positions, and I began to crave it, but it was never really mine. And so when you say it's not real, I think this season that we're in, Tori, is really forcing us all to get in touch with what's real, right? What's really real. And when we talked about this before, you talked about trauma being a chameleon. I think that's something that I can certainly relate to. Can you speak to that again?
I absolutely believe that trauma is a chameleon, because what it does is if we understand the nature of what a chameleon does, it blends itself into the environment that it's in, and it does it to protect itself. It's a defense mechanism. So that chameleon knows that when it comes up against a specific environment, it wants to blend in as much as it can so that it's not detected by any of its predators. And I believe that trauma is much the same way, that it transforms itself into wherever we are. So if our ailment is success, then trauma will fortify itself in our successes in many ways to cover up the deficiencies, right? And so if it's attention, it will get its attention from wherever it needs to get it so that it can cover up that deficiency. If it's money, then it'll chase after success, and it will chase after the things that make it feel comfortable. And it's not until something is thrown into the environment of the chameleon that it begins to jump out, because now it's not in unfamiliar territory. Now the surrounding is not comfortable for it. Traumas oftentimes, because that chameleon has gotten into a space where it's become comfortable, because we have created a normal environment for it to grow and flourish and hide itself, we don't even recognize it as being traumatic in many cases. It's not until we go to a therapist, or it's not until we're in our second, third, or fourth failed relationship. It's not until we can't keep a job and we can't get along with anybody. It's not until maybe we have experienced a loss and we don't understand what's going on, and it starts to dig at all the other things, that now something has been thrown into the environment of our dysfunction that's requiring these chameleons to now come out, and we have to actually deal with them.
Yeah, that's so true. And before we close, I want to deal with solutions, because I think there are some opportunities for us in the midst of COVID, right? There are some opportunities for us to learn some things about ourselves. There's some opportunities for us to pivot and to grow, and to even create a new reality for ourselves. But I would be remiss if I didn't come back to the question of health and the connection between our mental health and our physical health. Mm-hmm. Andrea, you talk about mental health being a lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And I believe that's so true. So I want to hear from you. Folks can read about that, in your book as well. Mental health is a lifestyle, and they can get that on Amazon, right?
Yep. 6 pillars to power up your mind. Mental health is a lifestyle, and it is a go-to guide to helping you keep your mind healthy and strong. That's just on a daily basis, but especially now during this time. I just wanted to say, Dia, and I love this, that you're saying solutions, because that's where we want to get to. And so what I would just tell everybody to do is to get into a routine daily right now, because although it's very uncomfortable and a lot of people are experiencing high anxiety, well, a surefire way to get your anxiety into check, one of them is a routine, because you have to let go of the notion that you can control things that you can't control, yet and still you can put into action the things that you can control. So routine, meaning get up every day. Get up, do some type of exercise. The exercise, when you move your body, you are physically, and this is what you're saying, that you can literally change your body physically, because you raise not only the endorphins, but the dopamine in your brain. That is the neurotransmitter. That is the feel-good neurotransmitter. You feel good after you move. It makes you more motivated. It increases your creativity, and it actually sharpens your intelligence by actually exercising. So especially during this time, get up, exercise. I want you to shower and change your clothes. Do not slump around the house in the same clothes that you've had on for days on days on days. Start your every day, and each and day, start it as a new day. Turn that page every day, and then get into some purposeful work. If you are working from home, then feel good. Work from home. That's what you need to do. You need to shift your brain into that gear and feel in purpose. But if you're not working from home, work on you from home. Now is the time to think about what you're going to do after this. As Tori would say, when the season changes, after this, there is life. We are still living. When you're breathing, God says it's not your time yet. So now let's prepare for when this season changes. So start working on your plan. What am I going to do next? So those are the things that I would suggest for you to do. And meditation, quieting your mind, practicing mindfulness meditation. You can do it within 30 seconds to 60 seconds a day. It's reminding you with breath, reminding yourself of being present here and now. What's going on right here and right now, shutting off the noise of the world and what you have to do and how you're being pulled in this position or that position. So that's what I would say. Those are suggestions for me that I would tell people to do right now.
I love it. And I want to get some solutions from you, Tori. But Andrea, you talked about the connection between the gut and the brain. And a lot of people, when they're experiencing anxiety, depression, all these things that people are going through right now, and we're eating our emotions, right? We're eating carbs, things that comfort food, things that make us feel better. Yes. So I wanted you to talk about the connection between what we're eating and how it's affecting our body, and what are some solutions in that regard as well.
Yes, so right now is the time to boost your immune system, because as we do know, what research is telling us is not everybody, this disease isn't fatal for everyone, right? And so what you want to do is, because a lot of people are walking around and they're asymptomatic, but what you want to do right now is boost your immune system. So you want to eat the things that are good for you, that make you stronger, that make you healthy. And so this is what I always teach people anyway in regards to your brain. So yes, tons of research that actually proves that there is a definite connection between your gut and your brain. So whatever you are feeding and putting into your body affects your brain. And so sugar is not good for your brain. You want to eat things that are sugar or alcohol is not good for your brain. And so you want to choose the alcohol, and you also want to know your number. So red wine, there's research to support that that's good for you. But too much of alcohol is not good, and it destroys your brain and dullens the intelligence of your brain and your mood. But so it actually sends you into a depressive state if you have too much alcohol. But you want to eat things like ginger. Ginger is very good for your stomach. You want to add turmeric. Turmeric has been known to help your mood and also to help with insomnia. And there's a lot of clients who have told me that and will use that. So you want to use or eat certain foods that will support your immune system and support your gut, because in that way, there's a direct connection to your brain that it also supports your brain.
Turmeric, in which form? Because you can go to the regular grocery store and just get the turmeric seasoning. Is that good enough?
It is good as long as it's organic and there's nothing else in it. And so you want to kind of sprinkle it on everything. If you look into the Indian culture, there's a lot of research that supports a lot of the benefits. I mean, people in the Indian culture have even been using that to heal their skin for years. So yes, you can get it in the supermarket, but get it in its raw form, and you can put it on if you do eat meat or if you don't eat meat, like sprinkle it everywhere. It's good for you. You just have to watch it, because sometimes the color won't come out of certain things, but as long as you keep it in the kitchen and put it in your food and eat it, it's good. It will be great for your stomach and your brain.
That's some good food for our souls right there. Tori, I want to get solutions from you as well before we go. But also, I heard you once talk about how trauma shows up in our physical issues, such as our bowels or skin and things of that nature. And I'm mentioning this because it's important, but also maybe there's some things that people can recognize if there's a shift now in terms of how things are manifesting physically.
There is a lot of research and studies on, I believe Andrea mentioned this, about how trauma gets trapped in the body because our bodies remember the trauma. So not just what goes on inside of us, but it's also our bodies that They just remember. Our bodies have memory. And so, yes, it can exhibit itself in skin issues. It can exhibit itself if you're having issues sleeping. That's a really, really big one that I find with many clients who deal with both anxiety and depression, is that they have issues with sleeping, either sleeping too much or sleeping too little. If you are noticing that your food intake, and so this is going to be a little bit different because we are in the home a little bit more, but watch what you're eating or if you're not eating. People who are breaking out in hives, eczema, all those things oftentimes are rooted in some sort of traumatic event or some sort of anxiety. And again, as Andrea said before, when we think of trauma, we think of these astronomically ugly things that happen, and that is trauma. But trauma can also be neglect. So things that don't happen for us can be too. We have to be careful about that. And all of us will experience it in different ways. If I had to say anything in terms of solution wise, I would probably say separating the laundry. I love to call that separating the laundry, where we separate those things that we can control, again, from the things that we cannot, and that we do not use our energy toward things we cannot control, because it typically diverts us from the things that we can control, and it then leaves us stuck because we do nothing. So we have to be mindful of that. I believe Andrea mentioned us meditating and remaining spiritually grounded. For those of you who have or subscribe to some faith, regardless to what it is, make sure that you are still practicing your tenets of faith. Even though our houses of worship may not be accessible to us, we need to bring some of those principles that we've learned in those settings and in those spaces into our homes and continue to practice. And so if you have a specific prayer ritual, if you have a specific holy reading ritual that you participate in, make sure you continue to do that, because that's going to be a very important thing. Because so much around us is changing, for many of us, our faith is the solid foundation that does not change. It's the one thing that doesn't move, that doesn't change. And so we can rest our feet and rest our hope upon the things that will not change, even though we see so much around us that is changing. And what that does is again, it calms our spirit. And again, it lessens some of those symptoms of anxiety. And another thing that I want to say, that don't pressure yourself to be extra productive during a time when our mobility is restricting some of our productivity. So if we're not able to move about the way that we normally would move about, we're not able to have access to our offices and to our spaces the way that we would normally have access to them, to remove some of this pressure and this anxiety, to be extra creative during this time or extra productive during this time, because that strain can also cause some anxiety, particularly when you look at, social media and what we're ingesting. We talk about the mind-body connection. And so not only what we feed our bodies impact our minds, but what we're feeding our minds is impacting our bodies. So making sure that we lessen some of the 24-hour news cycle of things that we're seeing, making sure we're not just on social media looking over and over and over at some of the things that we're seeing in that regard. Feed your mind good things too, so that it can manifest itself in your body. So reading good self-help books, reading good devotionals, reading good things that's going to, again, help you once you're out of the season. Those are going to be some of the great things that's going to be necessary. We are in a time that is unprecedented for all of us. None of us have been here before. None of us who are alive today have lived through a pandemic of this magnitude on our soil. So we have to give ourselves a break in not knowing or not having all the answers to what's going to be required of us. But to maintain our mental wellness, we're going to need to do that, because when we get out of this season, it's going to be imperative that we are able to make really good, healthy, sound decisions for ourselves and for our family.
Great. And finally, if I can just get a solution for people who are struggling right now with two kinds of relationship. One is loneliness in your relationship with yourself, and for people who are in homes that are not necessarily healthy emotionally. Any tips for people on how to cope with family members or their spouses during this time when you really can't get away from them?
So what I would say, and I'm loving, Tori, how you even mentioned social media. I forgot about it because I haven't been normal on here, so I literally forgot it existed. Oh, okay, that's right. Because what I am doing is taking care of my mind, right? And so the things that trigger us, we have to really be insightful and understand what they are, and then lessen them, like remove them. So things that trigger us. So one of the things is social media. However, let me just say this, that I believe that right now using technology is a great way to connect with your friends and your family if you are home alone. Because yes, we do need to social distance. However, get on that FaceTime and get on Zoom. You can play different games with your family, with loved ones, calling people, talking to people, connecting to people. And thank God that now we can actually see people when we connect with them. So I would say use technology now, but use it for the good. Don't use the part of technology that may trigger, negative thoughts or negative emotions. But I would use technology. And let me just say, if you're living in a house with other people and you can't run and you can't get away, you should still practice some social distancing. And let me just give you an example of that. Because, you may not have a mansion, but you do have a closet. You do have a bathroom. So I think that at sometimes what you have to do is take a break and take care of you. Tell your family members, I just need a minute. I'll have the bathroom from this time until this time. Or let's even make a sheet. Let's make a sheet where we can actually put the certain times that I'm going to use this big closet or this small closet or this bedroom or that bedroom. And then you use balance, because you do need to take care of your mind. And sometimes you need reprieve. You need to move away so that you can be by yourself with your own thoughts. And you want to choose your issues wisely. Using your voice is extremely important and it's powerful. But when we are all living closely for this time and can't go but so far, you have to choose your battles. Choose your battles. Some things are worth discussing. Some things are worth inserting yourself into, some situations, but some situations are not. Some situations, I may be able to put that on pause for another day, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And I wouldn't be a good friend if I didn't take a moment to just ask my strong friends, how y'all doing in this situation? How are you coping in the midst of COVID when your life has been interrupted as well?
I have been doing a lot of the things that I have been suggesting. And so I've been maintaining my rest. I've been exercising. I've been hydrating. I've been, creating boundaries within myself, because a lot of times we oftentimes want to implement boundaries, but we have not done them internally first. So we can't do that. So my time boundaries, I make sure that when I'm tired, I sleep. When I need a break and watch mindless TV, I take a break and I watch mindless TV. Those are some of the things that I have been able to do. My family actually lives here with me. I think I discussed with you all before that in 2018, in January, my mother was diagnosed with COVID.
COVID just got here in January.
It supposedly just got here, and somehow she was in the hospital for 5 days being treated for coronavirus in January of 2018. And it took her 6 months to get herself back together. And so having had them move from New York down here with me to Texas, everyone is in my home, and it has changed the dynamic in a way. I'm used to living on my own, right? Live by myself, not married, no children. And so having my family here, it has really tested the boundaries of my space, and me not saying my space, but it's our space now. It's changed the way that I am seeing myself and how I interact with other people. It's been challenging me. In many ways, I do happy hours with my girlfriends from college. We do it once a week on Fridays. And so I phone calls to catch up with other girlfriends and family members. We have been really intentional on staying connected. Prior to COVID, we were the most connected, disconnected generation of our time. And so this is requiring us to go back to the roots of our humanity and connectivity in creating the village. And that is really what I have been focusing on, is really strengthening myself through the eyes of my village.
Yes. And for me, I have been doing what Tori is saying. I practice what I preach. I preach and then I practice what I preach too. So I'm telling you, I get up, I am intentional, I get on my knees every day and I say my prayers and I tell God that I'm grateful for this moment because there's a lot to learn and I'm open to learning whatever it is that he has for me to learn, which I do believe that we were a society who were so disconnected and some of us we lacked empathy, didn't care for others, and so now we're forced to do it and I'm open for it. But I get up in the morning, I exercise, and sometimes that's what I do. I double mask and I get out here and I go take me a long walk and come back because it's so great for my brain, helps with my creativity and my motivation and the dopamine in my brain. So it makes me feel really good. And then I go to work. So I'm still seeing clients, which this has challenged me to see clients via telehealth. I've never done this before, didn't think about doing this before. It's all about my office and meeting people and seeing them in person. And I didn't even know that you could actually literally connect with someone in the way that I've learned that you could through this telehealth system. So I'm still seeing clients during the day. I break, I have lunch, I see my husband, he's still working in one room, and then my daughter, she's doing college in the other. And then in the evening, we get together, we watch shows. I've been cooking things that I've never cooked before because you get out here and you have all these businesses, talking about myself. And when my daughter was in college, my husband, he did number one and I did number two. He ate what he ate, I ate what I ate, and we both knew how to fix it. So we'd leave out in the morning, go do our work, come back, meet in the evening, and we whip up whatever it is that we eat and sit down, watch TV and kick it. But now a sister gets off her telehealth, go up in that kitchen, and I am creative, child. I done made some rainbow trout. Now where that? Who did what? Who said this? But yeah, that's what I'm in there doing. Okay, with my turmeric and my zesty seasonings. But yeah, I did that. And what I'm also doing is silly stuff because I love to laugh. You know this about me, dear. So I love to laugh and have a great time. So yes, I connect with my friends, sometimes they invite me to Zooms, but child, I done start doing TikToks with my family. So my daughter has me doing TikToks and my husband. So we dancing and I got her to be posting it. Ain't I something? But anywho, so that's what I've been doing. I've been trying to change my mind. Anytime that there's a negative thought that comes in my mind because I am human, or a thought of being fearful of the unknown, I create a shift because we as human beings are addicted to pain and suffering. We feel like, having negative thoughts, we're supposed to because it keeps us sharp and we're supposed to be worried. But I am very thoughtful and intentional about changing my thoughts because you know what? Thoughts don't have power. We give the thoughts power. So I work on that too, and I will change that thought just like I changed the TV channel and just really look for gratitude, the reasons that I am grateful for right here and right now.
Amen. And I too I wake up with gratefulness and really learning to appreciate the simple things like never before. The simple things that we take for granted, like walking outside without a mask. But I get up every morning and I'm very intentional about being grateful, but I'm also very intentional about making up my bed, just as you said, to create a sense of normalcy. I love aromatherapy and I just keep lighting my candles because it makes me feel better, right? It feeds my spirit. I go on my walks on the Katy Trail and for all the reasons that you already mentioned. And guess what? Yes, eating at home has become more enjoyable. And lastly, my husband and I, we binge watching Ozark. That's been our thing. So we've been doing date nights in the house. And we started doing that before this thing. But I realized it was God preparing me to just get in touch with the simple things and to really be grateful for what you already have, where you already are, as opposed to worrying about what's next. And the more I became grateful for what already was, guess what? More came because I created room for it. So I'm really grateful for this session. I've provided a service, but I also feel like I've received a service. I'm so grateful to have both of you in my life. I thank you for allowing me to be transparent, for being transparent in your gift, in your skills. And I know that so many more people will be blessed by this because we're going to share it with the world and market it as much as humanly possible because people need this information. They need to know that it's okay to not be okay. But more importantly, in the midst of your life feeling interrupted, hope doesn't have to be interrupted, right? Your life is changed, but there's hope on the other side. And there's hope even in your right now, because when you change your mind, you change your life. And I believe that you have helped us to do that today. And so for that, I say namaste. I say namaste to you, and I will be saying namaste when I see people from this point forward, because I will not be touching you, which means I see the God in you. And until and unless it is determined that we don't need to social distance, I would encourage folks to embrace namaste. Namaste. And once again, thank you for joining us on the Superpower Her podcast, where women of power and women with powerful stories testify. Follow me at DEYA Direct and follow us at Superpower Her. To learn more about my guests, follow Andrea Brown at awisebrown.com and on Instagram at awisebrown. And you can find Tori at Therapy Tori Talks and GracefulJourneyCounseling.com.
Be sure to like us on social media and subscribe on iTunes and anywhere where you listen to podcasts. Please comment and share with your family and friends and anyone who you think can benefit from this podcast.